So over $47 billion are allocated to the war on drugs annually in the United States. But it's been going on for 40 years, and have there been any kind of meaningful change? Everyone you know has been affected by this somehow, whether it's losing someone you love or just paying the taxes that go to this. I'm sure you've heard the expression, if it's broken, don't fix it. Well, that does not apply here, because it is broken and desperately needs to be fixed. Hopefully by the end of this, I can convince you all that we need to end the war on drugs and decriminalize all drugs. We need to decriminalize them because the justice system does not reform people, drug laws lead to death, and decriminalized countries tend to do better. Before we can talk about our justice system, first I have to talk about how the war on drugs was started. Most people think that the war on drugs was started in order to help the American people, but that is actually a lie. President Nixon started the war on drugs as a political move. According to CNN, an article posted on March 24, 2016, written by Tom LoBianco, titled, "Aide Says Nixon's War on Drugs Targeted Blacks and Hippies." Nixon's top aide was quoted saying, "You want to know what this is really about? Nixon had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." So since this is fact, and we know this for sure, surely something has changed, right?
I know that.
Not at all. In fact, nothing changed after that came out. There are still mandatory sentences for drug possession. In 2010, 51% of federal prisoners were serving time for nonviolent drug offenses. Over 70% of prisoners with serious mental illness also had a substance use disorder, yet only 7 to 17% of prisoners who met the criteria for alcohol and drug abuse or dependence received any treatment. And worst of all, 77% of prisoners who were arrested again within 5 years of escaping prison in the first place. So the prison is just actually a never-ending cycle and has been systematically planned like that.
That's true. I mean that.
And if we treat drugs like a moral problem instead of a health problem, it's never going to end. Next thing I want to talk about are people who do not make it to prison because they overdose first. Accidental overdose is the leading cause of death for people who are under 50 years old. Most people overdose, actually more people overdosed in 2017 than died in the entire Vietnam War. Most of these are preventable deaths, but the tough on crime policies from both parties have effectively undermined any attempt to create any policies that are for drug treatment or overdose prevention or anything like that. A lot of people who overdose are just too scared to call the cops or an ambulance to seek help because they do not want to get stuck in that never-ending prison cycle. One temporary solution for this are safe injection sites. They're all over Canada and Europe. Basically, the way they work is you bring in your drugs or whatever. They provide you a clean space to do it. They give you clean, unused needles to use it so you don't contract any diseases like that. And if you do overdose, you're supervised by people who have the drug that will revive you from it. You might be thinking, if it's just no penalty for doing drugs, it's going to increase, right? Well, according to NPR.com, they posted an article called "What's the Evidence That Supervised Drug Injection Sites Save Lives?" It was written on September 7, 2018 by Elena Gordon. They said they have found absolutely no evidence that has increased any drug usage. In fact, not a single person has died in any of their safe injection sites. And a lot of times crime has gone down in the cities where they do have them. Of course, most of these sites are only in Europe and Canada, since America only likes to punish drug users. Last thing I want to talk about is how other countries have handled drug laws. We are so used to zero-tolerance policies that it's hard to imagine anything else, anything that isn't harsh punishment for drug users. But what if we view drug users as, instead of criminals who deserve to be punished, victims that deserve help? Portugal has done just that. Portugal used to have drug laws just like we did, kind of a war on drugs policy. Zero tolerance, hard penalties in prison, things like that. But in 2001, they completely 180'd and decriminalized all drugs. Basically, if someone is found with less than a 10-day supply of drugs from like weed to heroin, they're sent to a commission for the dissuasion of drug addiction. It's only made up of 3 people, like a lawyer, a doctor, a social worker, and they talk with you and they decide whether or not you deserve treatment, minor fine, but typically what they do is they just let you go with no penalty at all. Of course, people might say, wouldn't that cause like a huge spike in drug use? Well, Guardian.com posted an article called "Portugal's Radical Drug Policy is Working. Why Hasn't the World Copied It?" Susanna Ferreira posted it in December 5th, 2017, and it states that HIV infection plummeted from an all-time high in 2000, from 104.2 new cases per million to 4.2 cases per million in 2015. All heroin and drug-related deaths have been cut in half in the first 5 years. Although not many countries have followed Portugal in decriminalizing drugs, a lot have started to decriminalize at least marijuana at a federal level. When Nixon started this war on drugs, he had no intention of helping people, and it was just a political move to imprison his political opponents' voters. And he knew the best way to do that would be to heavily criminalize marijuana. So he made it a Schedule I drug, which means it's as dangerous and as addicting as things like crack and heroin. Of course, several studies have come out since then that show that weed is basically harmless. The government hasn't budged at all on it. Even though it's still illegal at a federal level, some states have kind of followed up on that, like Colorado, and have completely legalized marijuana on a recreational level. Crime has sharply gone down, and tax revenue has greatly increased, so it's pretty much only been beneficial for these states. Hopefully, we could apply that to a national level for at least weed, and then eventually a national level for all decriminalized drugs, and we can follow like Portugal. Hopefully, you've all learned from this speech enough to want to research this on your own and side with me that we do need to decriminalize all drugs. This archaic system needs to end because our justice system does not reform people, our drug laws lead to death, and other countries who have legalized drugs have drastically improved. As long as we stick to this broken system, the problem will only grow. I look towards the future with hope that the stigma on drug use will end, so we as a nation, we finally begin to heal. Thank you.
Yeah.
Woo! That was a lot there.
We should go to Portugal.
I'm saying.
Yeah.